When you drive down Interstate 5 between San Francisco and Los Angeles, you see cotton fields, miles and miles of cotton fields, and you see row crops and you see orchards. And you think, oh, there's some cotton, there's some orchards, there's some row crops. This just wouldn't have been possible within the pre-existing natural order. The water is coming from hundreds of miles away through concrete rivers. You know, it just couldn't have happened without these fantastic waterworks that we built, which are all but invisible. Somewhere off in the distance is a huge aqueduct carrying water that sustains all of this. But if it somehow the water stopped flowing, you'd have a desert again overnight.
Everybody is conscious of water. If you head for the river with an empty bucket, you're liable to get shot. So.
Water makes wealth. Water can turn a low-value piece of property into something you can grow lettuce on.
Well, without water, there would just be a dry desert here, really. Water brings everything. Water brings the green. Out here, it's man-made compared to Mother Nature, the way of doing it back east.
This looks like garlic over here. Here's a young almond orchard over here. Right now, we've got a field here that's ready for planting for something, probably cotton or tomatoes. These are pistachio trees here. More lettuce over here and garlic over here. See this bronco right here, this tough grass you see on the edge of the road? This is the way it would have looked 100 years ago, before water.
10,000 trucks a day haul food to market on Interstate 5, hundreds of miles through the heart of California. For nearly a century, congressmen, governors, presidents, and farmers have fought bitterly to make nature do their bidding here on the San Joaquin Plains. They have made the Central Valley the richest agricultural region in the history of the world. Here, it is drier than North Africa. And to bring water to this dry land, we built the world's largest and most expensive waterworks. This is the most completely transformed landscape of its size anywhere on Earth, transformed entirely by water. Here, we churn out a quarter of America's food. How did we achieve this? And why did generations of Americans fight over this land where it never rains in summer? Sierra Nevada rivers to the east have flooded a few weeks each spring since the beginning of time. Snowmelt thundered down rivers teeming with salmon and fed the great swamps and 100-mile lakes. Every summer, the marshes evaporated. The valleys shimmered in withering heat. It was the American Serengeti.
This whole area was known as the Huron Sinks. It was kind of a swampy type thing with water inlets, just not very deep, but moving in and out. That's where the Indians camped. And they would do some fishing, oddly enough. Hard to believe today. The Indians, they were there during the winter months, and then they'd hightail it over where it was cooler in the summer, over toward the Sierras.
The valley's natural web of life had evolved over thousands of wet winters and dry summers. In a few game reserves, bits of the original valley survive to this day.
Unbelievable numbers of waterfowl. 80 to 100 million ducks and geese would winter on the flyway. You know, it's an old cliche, but the sky was black. I've heard it from people still alive. The sky was black with birds. There were grizzly bears all over the place. And there were antelope, million antelope, tule elk. You can find here and there tiny, tiny little pockets of what it once was. It was just phenomenal. It's completely and irrevocably and utterly transformed now. The Central Valley has one huge drawback. It stops raining in most years in April or May, and it starts raining again in November. And then when it does rain, it rains like crazy. In 1862, after the town of Sonora got 78 inches of rain in 6 weeks, the Central Valley was a lake the size of Lake Ontario. It was 250 miles long and 40 miles wide, and it was underwater. The only way to get from San Francisco to Sacramento was by boat. Sacramento was completely underwater in 1850 and again in 1862. From the moment that flood receded, the politicians, the state legislature, said, we have simply got to do something to control nature here, or we can't continue to live here. And that was really the beginning of the transformation of the valley.
A 19th century law allowed anyone to claim land over which he could sail in a boat.
Henry Miller staked out his claims for a section of land in a boat.
He was just another one of those Californians who came here from somewhere else, reinvented himself completely. He'd been a butcher boy.
He would float around and drive posts in the ground and mark his territory, and the law required it to be done from a boat. So that's just what he did. And then when the flood went away, why, according to history, he put a boat in a buckboard wagon.
And then had it pulled by a team of horses on a buggy or wagon and went traipsing across the country a considerable distance.
Whose empire ultimately reached 1,090,000 acres.
For his era, you'd have to take your hat off to him.
And he was the first person to build a dam, a significantly sized dam in California. And that led to 1,200 other dams of significant size that we've built since then.
In the late 19th century, pioneers built small dams, drained marshes, and dug canals. But still, they found themselves at the mercy of nature.
The dry farmers looked to the skies and the heavens for rain. They hoped that the rains would be timely enough to get a crop. Obviously, it was risky. And if they got into a reasonably wet cycle, they could do reasonably well.
It's a lot of praying.
With a lot of praying. They sent their wives to church, I know, every Sunday.
But a vast aquifer of pure water lay just underground, built up like water in a sponge over thousands of winters. In a few places, it even gushed up to the surface. After World War I, traveling salesmen went from farm to farm selling powerful new turbine pumps. Now farmers could pump as much groundwater as they needed. In 1929, California pulled ahead of Iowa as America's leading farm state, even as drought settled over the valley. Before long, growers had pumped the San Joaquin water table down 10 feet. And by 1930, they had 24,000 turbine pumps on the aquifer, drawing it down to 100 feet below the surface. Deep-rooted oaks on the San Joaquin plains began to die.
"70,000 refugees from the Dust Bowl present a new problem to California. Squatter camps spring up and living conditions alarm the health authorities. These newcomers seek to make a living by following the harvest and working in the fields or at odd
When growers
jobs.
called for more labor, refugees from the Midwest began their exodus to the Promised Land, to California.
They are almost all of American stock, people driven from their old homes by dust storms, drought, ill health, hard luck.
Some of the most famous photographs ever taken are Dorothea Lange's photographs of the Okies, if you will, the migrants in the Great Depression. What people may not know is that Most of those photographs were taken in the San Joaquin Valley of California. That's where it hit. That's where the great population migration was dumped.
Waves of Dust Bowl refugees found farmers leveling new tracts of land. Cheap labor and cheap water were key to the expansion, key to the abundance. What migrants could not see was that growers were pumping the aquifer dry.
They could pump hundreds of gallons a minute, like a fire hose. There was something like 24,000 pumps, big pumps. The groundwater just disappeared. They overdrafted it. They mined it so fast that the valley subsided. Portions of the San Joaquin Valley dropped 3 feet.
You're pulling out 100 buckets of water and only a cupful is being replenished currently. That this is a losing deal. There's no question about it.
By the middle of the Great Depression, the Promised Land, California's Great Central Valley, was running out of water. Now, farmers could either limit their pumping and produce less, or they could search for new water.
So that you can look across at the Sierras, and if there is a cloud layer or a cloud formation, you can see through the height, you can see the snow layer just capping the whole top of the mountains that surround the valley floor.
Northern California's worst blizzard, raging for a week without a let-up, buries the Sierra Nevada region in 13 feet of snow.
Every spring, Sierra snowmelt roared down the salmon rivers and out to sea.
Cut off from the outside world by snow-choked highways.
Ebbets Pass, just to the east of the farm counties, once got 73 feet of snow, deepest ever recorded anywhere in the
Time
world.
in 5 years is famous Donner Trail, where the storm's fury trapped scores of cars.
Only the federal government, which had just conquered the Colorado River, could move the snowmelt to farms across California.
The New Deal came along at an exquisitely opportune time. It was rescue.
Growers turned to Franklin Roosevelt, fresh from the national triumph of Boulder Dam.
Boulder Dam, Nevada, America's newest engineering wonder, is about to be dedicated by the President of the United States.
I have the right once more to congratulate you who have builded Boulder Dam.
Now, Roosevelt and Congress gave California a gift even greater than Boulder Dam, the Central Valley Project.
Here we have the most elaborate irrigation project, public works project ever built, just when it's desperately needed. And if it hadn't been for Franklin Roosevelt, it probably wouldn't have been built, because not many politicians believed at the time that the government ought to be doing this kind of stuff, but he did.
11 million tons of this aggregate must somehow be transported from Redding, 10 miles across the wilderness, to the site of the dam.
The Central Valley Project would capture snowmelt from the living rivers and dole it out in summer through a 3,000-mile grid of dams, canals, and reservoirs. It would water an area the size of Lake Michigan. No one had ever built anything like the Central Valley Project. This solution to the growers' overpumped groundwater would be bigger and more complex than Hoover Dam. It would be the biggest public works project since the Great Wall of China. It would be the most expensive waterworks in history. Shasta, the main dam, would be taller than the Washington Monument.
On behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation, I'd like to welcome all of you to Shasta Dam. My name is Sherry, and I'm going to be your tour guide today. Shasta Dam is the second largest concrete gravity-type dam in the United States. Now, this was constructed during the end of the Depression. This gave almost 5,000 people and their families employment. This was a big deal. And people did come from everywhere to get a job. It's amazing to think that there's over 400 feet of concrete above our head right now.
In 1935, most Americans had never heard of the Bureau of Reclamation.
This is what the dam looks like from the top, looking down.
But over the next half-century, this obscure agency would remake the face of the continent.
We're 400... Whoa! Oh my God! That is amazing!
These giant irrigation projects were made possible by the old Reclamation Act of 1902. Congress had passed the act a quarter-century before to stop the sort of land grabs Henry Miller had orchestrated, and to put thousands of new small farms in the arid West.
Go through the headquarters of the Bureau of Reclamation in Washington, you'll see murals all over the place, and they all depict this grand development of water resources and the cultivation of land and the arrival of settlers. New land, all through irrigation, otherwise it wouldn't exist. Those murals are everywhere.
And of course, you're not in the West very long before you realize that the key is water. And I think clearly that the original intent was if we got the water to the land, we could put farmers on it. This was a settling of the West, and that was the best of intents. And in fact, it was written into the law. This was going to be for small farmers. This was going to be for people who farmed 160 acres.
Days after Congress passed the Reclamation Act in 1902, speculators, real estate brokers, and congressmen began their horse trading. Everyone could see that land with water was worth more than land without water, and every senator wanted a water project. The political pork barrel was born. By law, water would be sold at a fraction of its cost to small, 160-acre farms. It was true that many small farms would soon get government water. But eventually, the largest recipient of the largest water project in history would not be a small farmer, but the Southern Pacific Railroad, largest landowner in California. By World War II, CVP canals would work their way south and soon transform the valley into the breadbasket of the world. Far to the south, farmers around Tulare Lake began lobbying for their own water project.
At high water, it would be 45 miles, about 22 miles down that way and about 22 miles up this way. And then it'd be about 10 miles wide and 10 miles this way, 10 miles west, 10 miles east. And then you'd be about 22 feet deep if it was the deepest part of the lake. That was by the water which soundings on there. And then your fish should be swimming by you.
Tulare Lake was 2 million years old, one of the oldest lakes on Earth. 45 miles long, it was the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi.
When it flourished in May and June with the runoff of 4 substantial rivers, the whole Tulare Basin, it could be twice, 3 times the size of Lake Tahoe in wet years. It was probably the last place in the Central Valley that really was wild.
If you get a lot of rain, we had a lot of lake. If we didn't get much rain, we had very little lake. And that's why a lot of people say it's kind of a magical lake. You know, a lot of rabbits and coyotes and things like that. So it was just a real nice spot, you know, for hunting and fishing.
For years, North American wheat has been produced most profitably on large farms. But today, none is more thoroughly industrialized than the 50,000-acre Tulare Lake Ranch in San Joaquin Valley, California.
Not far from the lake, on land once claimed by Henry Miller, some of the wealthiest farmers in the world raised wheat and cotton.
We have about 35,000 acres of grain and about 7,500 acres of cotton. We have 250 miles of canals and ditches on our ranch. All of our land is under irrigation.
In dry years, growers could farm bits of the lake bottom, but they wanted to farm it all. In 1940, The Bureau agreed to build irrigation dams on rivers feeding the ancient lake. The law would then force growers to sell off their huge holdings into small farms.
The idea of subduing nature has captivated the whole country. There's practically no dissent. No, the kingpins are the Army Corps of Engineers, Civil Works branch of the Army, and the Bureau of Reclamation. Congress cannot appropriate enough money fast enough for these agencies to build more dams. I'll give you your dam, you give me mine. That's the way it worked.
Here's two federal agencies going to two different committees for authorizations, two different sets of rules, all financed from the same pocket, the Federal Treasury.
And the Corps and the Bureau ended up in a bitter, bitter rivalry over who could get to the next dam site first.
The Corps of Engineers had far different legislative authority. They could build a project without acreage limitation. They could build a project with no operation and maintenance responsibility for the beneficiaries of the project, and no repayment responsibilities from the beneficiary of the project. So this was pretty tough competition.
The Corps dammed the rivers, dried out the lake, and then brought back what had been Tulari's water to irrigate the dry lake bed.
What could have been many hundreds, many thousands of small farms became these giant agribusiness empires. These corporations amassed so much wealth from this water, which was practically free. They basically have run agriculture in the southern San Joaquin Valley ever since.
There are thousands of acres of cotton in here, thousands really. I'd say probably 1 million acres right in this area all around us. From way back there, you can see as far as you can see is cotton. So, you know, it's big acreage, and it really overwhelms people who come into the area and look around. But the water is the essential thing. Without that water, you can't grow the cotton.
I was down in Tulare Basin just a couple of years ago, and I tried to find the lake. I knew I was approaching it, and at one point I was suddenly on it, and then I was miles into it in my car. It's gone. It's completely obliterated in a few years.
What had been Tulare Lake is now 50 miles of plowed cotton field along Interstate 5.
This is just like Las Vegas. It never stops.
I can remember some of the farmers in my father's front room talking about disking the land, plowing the land 24 hours a day, keeping the tractors that were turning the soil and preparing the soil for planting, and how they would swing in quarter-mile swaths and swing around. And you know, it was a ballet of linking huge tractors together to flatten the land, to level the land, to turn the land, to irrigate.
We had built the CVP to relieve strain on overpumped groundwater. But with so many acres of new crops, farmers increased their pumping. The aquifer fell. And now, the exploding population of Los Angeles wanted valley water. After all, California farms used more water in a year than LA could use in half a century. Even with the Central Valley Project, Californians once again wanted more water.
This is Pat Brown. This is Papa Brown here. This man promised California farmers that they would have plenty of water.
Growers asked Governor Brown to build a state-financed flood control and irrigation project.
Well, my father seemed to be obsessed with water. He talked about it all the time. In fact, I remember when he would give speeches running for governor the last time, he would give these speeches and talk about water all the time. And he'd come back and he'd say, I know it's not sexy. I know people aren't listening, but water's important.
He fought for it, made it happen. A man-made river, 600 miles long. Water for homes, for industry.
It's always a disaster, whether it's a drought or a flood, that gets the state rolling again. And in 1955, one of the worst flood episodes in the history of the state, occurred, where the Yuba River went over its banks, and the Yuba City, a fair-sized town in the Sacramento Valley, was almost destroyed.
Pat Brown knew that almost all Californians believed in flood control and irrigation.
He wanted to build the State Water Project. It was an unheard of idea for any state, even a rich state like California, to build something that big.
Governor Pat Brown of California joins with Universal Pictures executives to open the new Studio Center.
With swing votes from Los Angeles, Brown's State Water Project squeaked by on a 3% margin, the biggest bond issue ever by any state for any purpose, even though we already had the largest waterworks in the world.
The theory was that if any water reached the ocean, it was wasted. And so you had to grab it and put it somewhere else.
Large-scale excavation projects, such as harbors and canals,
The University of California and the Atomic Energy Commission tested nuclear explosions for excavating waterways.
Sedan was detonated at 10 a.m., July 6, 1962. The dome rose to a height of 290 feet before it vented at 3 seconds.
When testing became a public relations disaster, officials abandoned any thought of nuclear canal building in the Central Valley. On its own, the state of California was building its own waterworks, just as big, just as expensive as the Central Valley Project. Pat Brown's waterworks would cost as much as the Manhattan Project.
The size of the State Water Project is something you almost have to see to believe.
Orville Dam, solid earth, and almost half a mile thick at the base.
It's just about 150 feet shy of the Eiffel Tower. The pump lift at the Tehachapi Mountains is about 3,000 feet. So you have a river running uphill 2/3 of a mile.
Even before the Central Valley Project was finished, we were already building a second project, just as big.
The presidential helicopter stirs up clouds of dust as it lands in Los Baños, California, where Mr. Kennedy is to break ground for another federal state conservation endeavor.
It's a pleasure for me to come out here and help blow up this valley and the cause of progress.
By the late 60s, federal and state waterworks had lifted the rivers out of their ancient beds and delivered them to every corner of the Great Dry Valley. Soon, Bureau water would reach even the Westlands, most desolate part of the San Joaquin, 1,000 square mile district as dry as the Mojave. The local congressman predicted that the Westlands would soon be settled by thousands of small farmers.
Okay, if you need more, it's okay.
The large pumps are going to 283.
Decrease the total release of Feather River from 4,000 to 3,500.
You really have to go to the control room of the state and federal water projects in Sacramento. I mean, here we had these rivers, big rivers that used to engorge and spill, and now you have a few technicians sitting at a big bank of computers, and they regulate the whole thing. In fact, every morning they decide who is going to get how much water and power, and they just meter it out in a steady flow to 32 million people and 10 million acres of land. It's really a remarkable feat.
By 1974, the state of California had the 6th largest economy in the world, larger than all but the 5 greatest industrial nations. In 105-degree heat, without rain, farmers could grow nearly all the fruits and vegetables of the Midwest and Florida.
When the canal came, the farm really grew big here. So what I really miss is the nature. The pheasants and coyotes, everything had left.
Then the machine came, and we all got scared that we were going to be out of a job, but no, we had more work. We'd drive the machine, it was easier.
If it rained in the summer, we'd be in big trouble. It's the fact that through irrigation we can precisely apply the water at the right time. You can stress the cotton plant. You cannot give it water for a while, and that plant thinks it's going into a drought, and it's going to put on the bolls. Then you put the water to it, and you get a better crop. Rain is an enemy, so we're blessed with that dry summer. And combine the irrigation, and you've got something magical.
The new water supplies brought new mechanization and spectacular production that continues to this day. The University of California joined with growers and manufacturers to research specialized machinery for large irrigated farms.
Well, you're talking about farms that 20,000 acres, 50,000 acres, 100,000 acres, and these lands just overwhelm anything that people thought about in these forms of agriculture in the southeastern United States. And there was just nothing like the Central Valley. Everybody else in the country was relying on God to give them water, and these guys got it from the U.S. government, and they got it when they wanted it, time of day, day of the month, time of the year, and they got it almost for free.
A few researchers noted alarming changes amid the prosperity: accumulation of salt and pesticide residue, worsening conditions for farm labor, the lack of small farms, and the disappearance of salmon. Congress did not share their concern, and Western water projects rolled through Congress as they had for decades.
I've always referred to it as the Iron Triangle, which is really an alliance that was developed between local sponsors, their congressional delegation, and the Bureau of Reclamation, or the Water Development Agency, the Corps of Engineers. They were the heart and the soul. They were the oil that made the engine of the Congress run.
People voted for each other's dam projects. Every congressman wanted one, and every congressman got one if he voted for everybody else's. The way that legislation passed often was the committee chairman's favorite dam was stuck onto it, even though it was an education bill. Dams mean pork barrel.
I mean, the Civil Rights Act, for example, would have never been passed without the benefit of using, pork barrel water projects. Staff in the White House and the Office of Management and Budget prepared as a matter of routine a list of water projects which were not justified and ought not to be funded. President Nixon and then President Ford all, of course, said, this is very interesting and I really appreciate the hard work you've gone to prepare this list, but no way am I going to do this, and they rejected it. And that's primarily because they were insider politicians. They knew how the Congress operated, and President Carter was an outsider.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
When presidents come in and think that they're president, this is a serious mistake. They're only one element of government.
So along comes this former peanut farmer and governor named Jimmy Carter, who looks at this system and says, wait a minute.
Barely a month in office, Carter cut funds from 19 Western water projects under construction, saying they were bad for the environment and too expensive.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the President of the United States.
President Carter was there late at night in his office, and there were 12 advisors with him, and all 12 of them said, "Don't do this." Well, and he voted yes. They all voted no, and he went ahead and did it.
No, President Carter came in with a chip on his shoulder and a hit list in his pocket that he was going to stop a lot of projects that were unnecessary.
It was the first time that any politician had taken a 2x4 and conked the donkey on top of the head.
You're dealing here with projects in the case of Central Arizona that go back 30 or 40 years, thousands of hours of hearings, debate. Why was it that the decision was to take the money out of the budget? Why couldn't we announce that a review process was underway?
It was like lightning. It struck the institution. There were immediately meetings held to challenge, how would the Westerners challenge the president?
I would hope that we don't get to that point where there is a showdown at noon out on the Western Range.
Either the president has been badly misinformed or his action demonstrates a callous disregard for the welfare of the people of the states affected.
Castigating the secretary about this list, and the president was sticking his nose in something that he didn't understand and didn't know and didn't appreciate.
And I'd also ask your assurance that
environmental concerns will not be the only thing which will be cranked into your investigation.
I mean, clearly President Carter was right. These projects, when you looked at them, were completely unjustified, a complete waste of the taxpayers' money.
At one point, I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure this list is all bad. I think there's some projects here that don't make sense. And it was like a ton of bricks fell on you.
Some of them are $168 million over authorized cost, $192 million over, $53 million, $11 million, $10 million. I think the review is justified.
People pulled you aside in the hallway and they said, you can't do this. We've got to stick together. We've got to hold together. This is an assault on all of us. If they get my water project, they're going to get your water project. If they get my water project, I'm going to help them get your water project.
These projects need to be looked at very closely. I personally don't believe that any of the projects ought to be built, but I'll keep an open mind.
And it was the bell that could not be unrung. And it sent out a message to other members of Congress who weren't from the West that here was something that was amiss. Here was a place, if you wanted to go at a waste of taxpayers' money, you could. If you wanted to build your environmental credentials, you could. The President Carter paid a great price for what he did, but he changed, again, the entire political history of how these dollars are spent.
Water projects are symbols. They're symbols of they're always something much larger than what they really are.
In the end, Carter could not stop most of the dams on the hit list, but nothing would ever be the same. He sent investigators to see what large-scale irrigation had achieved in the Westlands, largest water district in America.
The Reclamation Project Act, to begin with, visualized family farms of a subsistence nature. They didn't visualize farms that were going to make enough money to send the kids to college or even send them to a dentist. They visualized a farm that would support a family, grow their feed, and maybe a little surplus so they could buy a bag of salt now and then.
Those of us that had lived out here for many years had seen what happened to the homesteaders where they dried up and gone away. The 160 acres was not, was too small to be a viable farm operation.
It was, who's going to get the benefits of this federal investment? Is it going to be rich guys? Is it going to be speculators? No, we don't want that to happen. We want it to be farmers, family farmers.
We end up in California where we're irrigating lands that even go back to the Spanish land grants, 50, 60,000 acres in a single holding. So it was far different from what was visualized by the 160-acre limit in the 1902 Act.
There was not a single 160-acre farm in the Westlands. Growers and the government had been arguing since the beginning over when this 1,000 square miles would be broken into small farms.
Now, in owning the 160 acres, it meant a wife could have 160, the husband could have 160, and if they had 20 kids, they could just line them up, 160 to each kid. And if you had an Aunt Susie somewhere, and you had Uncle Ben over here, and their 4 kids, and you can see what began to happen.
And we found ways to comply that we could make the economics work. And if it meant, you know, creating some subsidiary organizations, if it meant having your son have 160 acres and you have 160 acres, you did that because that's what it took to survive. There was no big, kind of scheme to rip off the treasury. It was just a way to make things work.
Local Chamber of Commerce was together with the local Farm Bureau, that was together with the local Cattlemen's Association and the Cotton Growers Association, and we all arrived at agreement that you should spend the federal money to bring us the water. Turned out they were all the same people.
We took hundreds of millions of dollars, federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, and we bestowed it on a very small number of people. And we did so with the promise that they would break up their farms, that they would provide rural communities throughout the area,
And the large farmers and their lawyers had the ability to morph themselves into any size farm that you wanted to make eligible for the subsidy. You had the Central Valley farmers who were not only growing subsidized crops, but then they were receiving subsidized water to grow that subsidized crop, and the federal treasury was paying farmers in other parts of the country not to grow that crop. These people had hundreds of ways to skin the cat.
They had predicted that there would be perhaps a 30 or 40% increase in agricultural productivity, and in fact, over the first 10 years, it had increased by 300%.
Till we get that harvested. 7 days a week, 16 hours a day.
I worked from 6 to 6, and then when the barley came, 18 hours a day. We didn't know what a day off was.
The first time that I went down to Westlands, Huron was the largest community. It had lost its doctor. It didn't have a high school. It didn't have a newspaper. There was one grocery store. There were, I think, 4 bars. Of course, everyone was living in very dilapidated rental housing. The actual conditions that we discovered that people were living under there were as bad or worse than the worst conditions that I've encountered in Africa, south of the Sahara, or southern India, or any parts of Latin America.
The water out here, it's always been a mystery. And I say mystery because without the water, I mean, we would be in a desert sand right now. I mean, that's what made the big corporate farmers who they are today. But the fact that, there is water out here, it creates jobs, creates homes, creates wealth for the farmers, not for the people in Huron. We've been fighting poverty for years and years and years, and that's a demon that probably won't go away.
In 1979, Carter's investigators found that Huron, the largest town in the Westlands, had become one of the poorest towns in California.
Spanish surname population, families were running 30% below the poverty level, which is particularly striking in the context of zero unemployment. We couldn't find any evidence for unemployment in the region, so that these were people working very hard for below poverty wages.
You can do a documentary and you can go out and you can say these people have a rough life, they have a low income, but you can also live with them and work with them and know that they're happy people. It's just like if you go to the third world, the poorest people in the world, if they are adjusted and have a way of life, that is a fine way of life for them. Mexican Americans have found great work and like in some cases, very well paying. In other cases, pretty marginal, but there's a way of life for them too. Driving a tractor is driving a tractor and it's outside. It's a better job than a lot of us have.
Small farms and towns vanished as production skyrocketed. For 2 weeks each spring and fall, all the lettuce in America comes from the Westlands. And every year, enough cotton for 1 billion t-shirts. By 1979, no place on earth had been so changed by the manipulation of water. Except in a few game reserves, nearly all the valley's native fish and animals were gone. Much of the Sacramento River now irrigated crops, and the San Joaquin River sometimes flowed backwards. The valley's winter-run Chinook salmon were nearly extinct.
The crux of the matter really is it salmon or people? Now, I'm sure people can survive without salmon, but I don't think people can survive without beans and potatoes and lettuce.
There was a run of 1 million to 2 million salmon coming up the Sacramento River every year. There were 21 canneries in the Central Valley.
There isn't any way to control a river without having some trade-offs. And the salmon, unfortunately, was one of the trade-offs on the Sacramento River and on the Columbia River.
Was it worth it?
I think it's worth it, yes. I think that there's substitutes for eating salmon. You can eat cake.
In 1980, the Carter administration was reviewing growers' water contracts. They were paying about a quarter of what it cost to bring the water across California. President Carter, running for re-election, could have sent a strong message by questioning the price of water, enforcing the 160-acre limit, and demanding environmental changes in Western water policy. But suddenly, on the heels of a hostage crisis in Iran, Carter found himself in a race for his political life against Ronald Reagan. He turned to the San Joaquin Valley for campaign support.
Mrs. Carter's first stop in California was on friendly turf at the home of a longtime supporter in Fresno. It was the second day
Carter and Congress chose not to change Western water policy.
I mean, every time a presidential candidate, every time a gubernatorial candidate, every time a congressional candidate needs some money, you land down there on one of those private landing strips, they have lunch for you, you walk out of there $10,000 richer, $150,000 richer, and they buy another day. And that's what they're doing. They're just playing for time. You know, these are not shy people. These people, you couldn't, never mind.
But there was now public suspicion that something had gone terribly wrong amid the abundance. And an environmental time bomb was about to explode at the Kesterson Game Refuge.
The story from NBC's Don Oliver.
Employees of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have been doing this for months, trying to frighten off birds and waterfowl from the toxic ponds of the Kesterson Wildlife Refuge.
It's kind of difficult for an individual who's been spending a lifetime trying to create habitat to be asked to try to move the wildlife away from this habitat that you've created. These traditions of the birds are very, very difficult to break. In fact, they're almost impossible, especially once they've begun to nest. It was a war zone out here.
The valley's web of life had been thrown into chaos.
Many eggs are still found to contain deformed chicks. The Fish and Wildlife people refer to these mosquito fish as little selenium tablets. The Bureau of Reclamation
poisons from intensive farming and irrigation were deforming whatever tiny little museum pieces of nature were left.
Runoff from Westland's farms contained selenium. For years, drainage had concentrated the selenium in the Kesterson ponds, while the Bureau of Reclamation waited for a permit to dump it into the San Francisco Bay and Delta.
We went ahead with the Westlands project before we solved the drainage problem. We thought we knew how to solve the drainage problem. We thought the Kesterson Reservoir could be flushed on out into the Delta. We didn't have it solidified. So I made a terrible mistake by going ahead with Westlands at the time we did.
David Burrington reports tonight that the problem begins on the farms and it winds up in the refuge.
Many young birds have been killed and deformed by high concentrations of selenium, a trace element found in the region's soil. Last month,
it was really an eye-opener when we started to take a look at some of the embryos, the very distorted features, bills that were twisted, missing eyeballs, bulges on the brain, deformed feet. They remind me of the thalidomide babies that were over in Europe.
And these mud hens were up at this Kesterson place, and they were getting too much selenium, and too much selenium is widely known does cause birth defects in anything, so they're getting deformed mud hens and things, which was unfortunate, but wasn't the end of the world.
When it exploded in our face with bird deformities, gave all of our attackers the proof they need that agriculture really is bad. It does destroy the environment because we had some deformed birds out there. Kesterson was the proof, and we were the bad guys, and it was really a turning point. And we would sit and struggle with a photograph of a bird, headline on every newspaper and TV news every night, about this crisis at the end of irrigated agriculture, and 1 million acres are going to go out of production. We could not make a connection between how do we solve this problem and how do we deal with this public crisis over here that was created.
But for those mud hens and but for those ducks at Kesterson Reservoir, that plan eventually would have continued to creep on. But those mud hens, they really turned the political history of the Central Valley Project.
It was all adding up. Public anger at the Kesterson fiasco, congressional investigations into water subsidies, farm labor, and salmon. And now, the last straw, 6 years of drought. Dust storms raked the valley, and trucks bound for market slammed into the biggest wreck in American history on Interstate 5 in the Westlands.
And the drought contributed to the wrecks. Growers, short on water, let their fields go barren, and the dust piled up, waiting for strong winds to blow across the highway.
And the drought kind of moves us ahead about 20 years in time, and all of a sudden, there's not enough water to go around. We have major shortages.
Water was a lot like energy, that it was price responsive. And that we really had to do was attack the subsidy.
And we became a nice target. There's a subsidy issue fashioned in there. There was all kinds of sexy political things, ways to beat us up. Big, slow-moving target.
The areas of the country which have huge population growth on limited water resources are going to have to change the structure of their water usage. They're going to have to become more conservation-oriented.
George Bush on the road, on a roll. He told the Valley farmers...
The political winds were about to shift, away from agriculture toward the environment. George Bush had won the Valley in 1988.
I don't believe we need the federal government getting into the water rights business.
In 92, Bush was losing to Bill Clinton. Just before the election, he signed a popular reform law in hopes of gaining electoral votes. It raised the price of water, and for the first time in 50 years, returned water back into the salmon streams.
You were going to have to now pay for that water. And if you had to now pay for that water, you'd have to take into consideration other concerns in terms of how you use that water, how efficient you are, the kinds of crops that you have to grow.
When the law was changed, when the project was redirected, it was a huge train wreck. And because we've been chugging along, doing great, 50 years of reliability, the project working good, all this very stable. You know, farmers were not worried about water. Water was not an issue in California until the drought because it was reliable. And now we've got new contracts and our water costs have gone from $3.50, which is a great deal for 40 years, to $35 to $45 an acre foot overnight. Huge swings in costs.
Well, water has gotten more expensive, but really with a shortage of water and all, we're paying more now than we ever have. So as much as we're paying, we need to make sure we don't use any more than absolutely necessary. I don't think we ever really wasted water out here because it was always expensive, but we're, I think this has got to be one of the most efficient uses of water there is.
But it belongs to us, don't it? The big canal, the taxpayers? Did I say something wrong?
In the years since the reform law, there has been a fragile peace. But the Great Central Valley will never be the same. Nearly all the corporate farms have gone, along with some smaller farms. Native birds and Chinook salmon have begun a very slow comeback. The large growers who remain are among the most productive and water efficient in the country, producing more with less water. No one will ever know whether thousands of small farmers could have done the same.
To order a copy of this program or the complete Cadillac Desert series, call 1-800-343-4727 or write to the address on your screen. Cadillac Desert was brought to you in part by GAP, a proud supporter of programs that address the issues you care about. And by Brita, maker of Brita water filtration systems. Brita makes tap water taste the way nature intended. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the support of viewers like you. Major funding also provided by the Ford Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, with additional funding from these organizations.
This is PBS.
Next on Cadillac Desert.
Over 1 billion people in the world don't have access even to basic drinking water and sanitation requirements. Many of these countries are growing very, very fast.
Stay tuned to WETA for the final episode of Cadillac Desert. Last Oasis is straight ahead.
The great game of money and politics in America is about to be turned upside down. Get ready for a torrent of hearings and investigations, accusations and denial, high drama, low comedy, voter outrage, and citizen action. I'm Ray Suarez, and I'll be your tour guide on Follow the Money, a look at money and politics from a citizen's perspective.
Friday night at 9:30 on WETA.
On the next battlefield. Midway, the turning point of the war in the Pacific. Using advanced 3D graphics and rare color footage, relive the American struggle to defeat the Japanese on the next battlefield.
Tune in Thursday night at 10 on WETA.
The greatest war archive in existence and the most chilling account of a terrifying 30-year tyranny. This is Russia's war in all its boundless courage.
Stalin completely lost his nerve.
In all its suffering.
We lived in total fear and humiliation.
This is the Russian people's story. Don't miss Russia's War, hosted by Dr. Henry Kissinger.
Tune in Friday night at 10 on WETA.
Home to the world's highest peaks, mountains of snow and ice that mystify, yet life flourishes. Explore the history and the natural world that surrounds this palisade of ice. Himalaya.
Join us Wednesday night at 8 on WETA.
China. In a tumultuous quarter century, the biggest nation on Earth reinvents itself. Stories of China's newest revolution, told by a generation born under the red flag.
Politics is too dangerous because it won't just destroy your ideals. It will eat up your soul and ruin your life.
Wednesday night at 9 on WETA.
In Virginia, Maryland, and the District, this is WETA, Washington.
Local broadcast of Cadillac Desert is made possible in part by WETA members and by the Town Creek Foundation, working to enhance the nation's environment, support public radio and television, and seek world peace.
Next on Cadillac Desert.
Over 1 billion people in the world don't have access even to basic drinking water and sanitation requirements. Many of these countries are growing very, very fast.
Cadillac Desert is brought to you in part by GAP, a proud supporter of programs that address the issues you care about. And by Brita, maker of Brita water filtration systems. Brita makes tap water taste the way nature intended. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the support of viewers like you. Major funding also provided by the Ford Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, with additional funding from these organizations.
Water is the essence of our existence. Without it, there can be no life. Civilizations began next to water. But as populations grow, especially in arid regions, there is not enough to go around.
In the past, decisions about water have been guided by a very simple formula, which said, estimate human demands for water and build a new water project to meet it. And that equation was simple and it worked as long as water was abundant. But it's not working anymore because water is becoming scarce.
Concrete dams have dominated our management of water in the past 50 years. Dams tested and built to master the power of nature. The story of water has been the story of controlling it. 38,000 large dams have been built in all. Dams to store water and control floods. Dams for irrigation and hydroelectricity. Dams that have inundated canyons and drained wetlands. Now, the dam building era in the United States is coming to a close. The best sites are taken. The economic and environmental costs are too high, and Americans are beginning to turn to conservation. But developing countries seeking to provide water and power for growing populations still covet these engineering marvels. They've sent their best and brightest to be trained by the Bureau of Reclamation, builders of the super dams of the American West.
Right after Hoover Dam was completed, the world recognized that a great achievement had occurred. The Bureau of Reclamation was besieged, and we ended up as the training center for young engineers sent here from Thailand, from Turkey, Ethiopia, all around the world, actually. India was an example of everywhere I went in India, they thought I was the second coming of the Buddha.
More than any other nation, India has staked its future on large dams. In 1963, Prime Minister Nehru predicted that dams would become the temples of modern India. 2,200 dams have created electricity and supplied irrigation to feed the hungry subcontinent. But the dams have taken a heavy human toll. Some 20 million people have lost their homes. In recent years, a controversy has erupted over the damming of the Narmada River.
तो हमें बाहर ना निकल सकता है तो पुलिस आ भी એટલે हमने बूम पाड़ के पानी आ गई उन्हें नकलो हम तो हमें बाहर न निकलता रे लोग आविन પછી हमने जब जबरदस्ती बाहर निकाला तो पैसे में निकल
જતું રહ્યું નદરની માં બધું જતું રહ્યું મારી મિલકત મારું ઘર બાર મારા છોકરાને લઈને નાઠો.
To fight the damming of the Narmada, protesters have gone on mass hunger strikes. Led by Meda Patkar, members of the movement even threatened to drown themselves in the rising floodwaters. Construction has stopped while the government reviews the project. So far, 60 villages have been inundated. It is unclear how India will proceed. A hemisphere away on the border between Argentina and Paraguay, construction continues on the massive Yacyretá Dam. Biologists worry that the reservoir created by the dam will cause an outbreak of schistosomiasis, what some call the disease of hydroelectric dams in the tropics. Snails like these breed in the stagnant reservoirs, releasing a parasitic worm that penetrates human skin, damaging the liver and spleen. People are not the only ones at risk. As this region is flooded, 70 kinds of mammals and 300 bird species will lose their home in a region where rainforest habitat is rapidly disappearing. Efforts to rescue some of the larger animals rarely succeed. Many will die from the stresses of capture.
Where the dam building era is really going gangbusters now is in countries like Indonesia, China, Malaysia, Brazil, other South American countries, Chile. Some of the most beautiful rivers on the planet are now being turned into reservoirs. And some of the biggest dams ever built, bigger than anything that we've built, are being built in countries like Brazil and China.
In China, work goes on to build Three Gorges Dam, the world's largest hydroelectric project. Eventually rising 600 feet high and over a mile wide, the dam will create an enormous lake that will stretch nearly 400 miles upstream. China's leaders say Three Gorges will fuel its industrial revolution and save millions of people from frequent floods along the Yangtze River.
When it's finished, it's going to be the largest dam in the world. It will supply 1/10 of the electricity for China.
Critics of Three Gorges say the project will create a $30 billion bog because silt will build up behind the dam. The project will flood the nation's most beautiful region, as famous in China as the Grand Canyon is in the U.S. Over 1 million people in riverside villages will be displaced. Even the World Bank, long a supporter of large dams, has withdrawn from Three Gorges. But China says it will go ahead and find its own financing. In late 1993, Dan Beard, then chief of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, withdrew his agency's technical support for Three Gorges.
There's no better example of a project we shouldn't be involved in than Three Gorges Dam. We've moved away from water project construction in the United States, and I felt it was hypocritical for us to continue to be involved in the largest dam construction project in the world. There are better, easier, and cheaper ways to solve the problems of flood control and power production than Three Gorges Dam.
Moving from large construction projects to a culture of conservation requires a major change in the way people think about water. Such a transition can take decades, and many developing countries face staggering problems of both water quality and water supply. Mexico City, struggling now to provide water for 20 million people. It's predicted to grow by another 10 million in the next decade. Just where the water will come from remains an open question. Originally built on a system of 5 lakes, Mexico City began its history rich in water. The Aztecs once farmed floating fields along these canals. This is all that remains of those lakes. Today, 3/4 of Mexico City's population enjoys modern plumbing and plenty of water for drinking, showers, and sanitation. But in these sprawling shanty towns, migrants from rural areas lack water for even the most basic human needs.
Mexico City faces one of the most difficult challenges of any urban area in the world with regard to water. 18 to 20 million people living in a very, very densely populated area. The next best new source of water is 1,000 meters below the city. They're very dependent on groundwater and already overpumping that groundwater on the order of 50 to 80%.
The city's ancient metropolitan cathedral is sinking because of the overpumping. Built after the Spanish conquest in the 16th century, the structure sags dramatically on one side. Wires, joists, metal clamps all support the weakened structure. Some sections of the city are sinking 12 inches a year. One-quarter of Mexico City's water must be pumped in from 100 miles away. With antiquated pipes damaged by subsidence and earthquakes, the city loses almost 1/3 of its water to leaks. This is a common problem around the world for cities with aging pipes. Mexico City still celebrates its long love affair with water. But there's a terrible irony in the way rich and poor people get their water. For the well-to-do, piped-in water is cheap and plentiful. For the poor, water is very expensive and hard to come by.
Mexico City has a growing population. A lot of people are coming in from outside to the city, and for the city it's very difficult to provide them with services. In the areas where people don't get much of the water supply, which is the poorer part of the population, they get their water through water trucks that come in bucket by bucket, which is very expensive. Sometimes they have to pay one of the quarter amount of what they earn a day for this water.
In this new district, residents were promised piped-in water by local politicians. But so far, they have received no services. Like many of her neighbors, Guadalupe Sanchez Lopez is forced to store her family's water supply in rain barrels. She lives with her children in a 2-room house with no running water. Unconnected to any sewer, the toilet represents a hope for the future. It sits over a hole in the ground. For 2 barrels of water from a local company, Sanchez pays 5 pesos, a quarter of her family's income of $4 a day.
¿Cuánto le debo? 5 pesos. Pues problemas tenemos con el agua de que no tenemos a veces. Y cuando tenemos necesitamos dinero para comprar un tambo de agua o 2. No tenemos a veces. Y cuando se dañan del estómago, les agarra diarrea.
Sí, la ficha número 2.
Pero ahorita
Pásate. El problema principal en la falta de agua y en la adecuada distribución del agua principalmente es principalmente problemas gastrointestinales y básicamente problemas de salud en general.
Young children are at the greatest risk. Child mortality here is 10 times higher than in wealthy sections of the city. And just down the street, sewage and industrial wastes run raw in one of Mexico City's main canals, a common problem in many parts of the developing world. Following a recent outbreak of cholera that claimed lives all over Latin America, Mexico City launched a campaign urging people to boil their drinking water and to wash their hands after going to the bathroom. 80% of illnesses in developing countries can be traced to unsafe water and poor sanitation.
Over 1 billion people in the world don't have access even to basic drinking water and sanitation requirements. Many of these countries are growing in population very, very fast. Many African countries, Middle Eastern countries, their population will double within a generation. So supplying water to meet the drinking water needs, the food needs, the industrial needs of a population growing that fast is extremely difficult. And many of these countries are already water short.
The nations of the Middle East are already hitting the limits of their renewable water supplies. With populations predicted to double in 30 years, the Israelis, Jordanians, and Palestinians will have only enough water for urban and industrial use, with little fresh water to grow food. These peoples realize that if they don't cooperate to share their limited water resources, it may mean war. Israel has had long-running disputes with Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon over water rights. Hostilities between the Israelis and the Palestinians over land have run high for decades. But less well known is the fact that Israel draws 1/4 of its water from the occupied territories. Resolving water disputes will require not only diplomacy, but new technologies that can make the most of the region's limited supply. Israel is building hundreds of apartment blocks to accommodate a large influx of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, 700,000 people in 3 years. To meet its growing needs, Israel is depending more and more on recycled water.
We recycle and reuse our dirty shirts. We launder them. You have to learn how to launder water.
As more fresh water is diverted to cities, recycled water is the only source that actually grows with population. It's the shadow of the supply. Israel now recycles 2/3 of its water. This facility handles the wastewater of 7 cities. Reclaimed water gets used in cooling and sanitation systems. Though not intended for human consumption, the final product does meet drinking water standards. Recycled water is also piped south to irrigate crops.
Now, at first, the farmers were hesitant. Farmers are usually pretty conservative. But as time went on, and particularly during the drought in 1991, wastewater became a very sought-after resource. Why? Because when the sweet water sources were in short supply, the wastewater was there, and the farmers were clamoring to connect up to the wastewater reuse project.
In the blistering heat of the Negev, Israeli farmers have created an agricultural miracle. Pioneering the use of drip irrigation, they have doubled their harvests with the same amount of water. Perforated tubes deliver water directly to the roots of the plants, avoiding evaporation losses. Moisture sensors tell farmers precisely when their crops need water. Drip technology can save 1/3 of the water used in spray methods. However, with any form of irrigation, a problem may develop.
History tells us that irrigation has periods like in the life of a married couple. There is the honeymoon between the irrigator and the land, and this happens in the beginning, like most honeymoons. And after some decades, there is a increasing deterioration of the land as a result of irrigation.
Salt brought in by irrigation water concentrates in the soil, damaging its fertility.
The well-known historical example is the Fertile Crescent, Iraq of these days, where thousands of years ago, irrigation was used, but the land deteriorated and some of it has still not recovered from this bad experience with human irrigation. Similar processes are now starting to be seen in every irrigated region all over the world, from California through the Mediterranean region to Australia, China, India, and South America.
Once salts build up, they must be flushed out with even more water. So over the course of generations, there are limits to how much water can be conserved. The power to remove salt from ocean water has long been a dream, promising almost limitless water for human needs. Desalinated water is already serving some urban populations, those that can afford its high price. But it's unlikely in the foreseeable future to be cheap enough for use in agriculture.
The problem with desalination is that it's very energy intensive. It takes a lot of energy to remove salt from water. So at the moment, most of the desalination that's happening in the world is in the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, they account for about half of all the desalination that's happening, even though they have only a tiny share of the world's population. They're essentially turning oil into water, and they're among the few countries that can afford to do that.
Disputes over water in the Mideast go back a long way. According to the Bible, the wells in the land of the Philistines were called hatred and contention. In Gaza and on the west bank of the Jordan River, Israel provides piped-in water to Israeli settlers, while Palestinian citizens have received a more limited supply.
When it comes to military occupation and fairness, they don't go together. If the current situation continues, I see the Palestinians heading for a water catastrophe. Already we see signs of it in Gaza, where kidney failures as a result of drinking brackish water and unsafe and polluted water. This cannot continue. This is a recipe for disaster.
In most Palestinian homes, rainwater is collected and stored in cisterns below ground. Each cistern costs $10,000, an expensive investment for families who only earn half that in a year.
A settler in the West Bank consumes 7 times more water than a Palestinian in the West Bank. And in Gaza, they consume 14 times more. This is a source of injustice, which is causing many Palestinians to ask, why? We need to have water. Our children drink water exactly like Israeli children.
Of all of the people in the Middle East, the Palestinians are those most short of water. And I, as an Israeli, would like to say that without getting into the amounts of water that are under discussion, it should be in Israel's interest to see to it that the Palestinians get a fair deal and get enough water so they feel comfortable for the future. It's in Israel's interest to live in peace with its neighbors.
I think the potential for conflict is going to persist until we see water sharing agreements that divide the water equitably in each of the major river basins in the Middle East and elsewhere. We're beginning to see countries realize that they have benefits to gain from cooperating. And if they continue to see that, we could see water and water scarcity become a motivation for peace rather than war.
Half a world away, the tug of war over water goes on in the arid American West. There's a lust for water here that borders on obsession. When people get free time, they head for the nearest water they can find. Rivers, pools, artificial lakes. There are no natural lakes here. Water from the Colorado River has transformed a desert into the fastest growing region of the country. 10 major dams stop up the river, and canals siphon off water for irrigation and growing cities. Most of these water projects were constructed before the 1960s and 70s, when things began to change.
These projects before were built with almost no environmental consideration at all. And then finally, the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act came along, and those allowed the public into the process. And then the costs began to get outlandish. The best sites had been taken. And so the newer dams were much more expensive for the equivalent amount of water that you might get out of them. And essentially, as the country amassed a greater and greater federal deficit, people began to say, wait a minute, why are we building billion-dollar dams when all you have to do is conserve some water and you can get just as much with conservation as you would with supply?
The city of Denver was forced to put these new realities to the test. In 1982, the Water Board filed application to build Two Forks Dam to enable the city to store additional water diverted from the Colorado River. In the midst of a growth boom, Denver saw Two Forks as a way to secure the region's future. What city officials didn't anticipate was an overwhelming protest from environmental groups, fishermen, biologists, and ordinary citizens.
It really was the last dance of the dinosaurs. It was developed in an era when we thought about water only as its value in being taken from the stream to supply cities and to supply agriculture. We're now in the mode where we think about water in its natural course as valuable in its own right.
Two Forks Dam was to be located 25 miles from Denver on the South Platte River. It would flood a 28-mile stretch of land, including Cheeseman Canyon and a prime trout fishery.
You can't understand what a dam does and what a reservoir is unless you've been there before the construction. And if you go out to Two Forks, what you find is the narrowing of a great canyon. A very efficient place to put in a 60-story high cement plug. But it is a place you don't want to lose. And people went there and they spoke out in different ways and said, we don't want to lose that place.
There was more than Cheeseman Canyon at stake. The Platte River flows north into Nebraska. Biologists worried that Two Forks Dam would pirate the Platte River's flow, strangling wetland habitat for migratory birds.
All around us right now, we're hearing the sound of the sandhill cranes that visit the Platte every spring as part of the greatest migration of cranes that occurs on the face of the earth. They gather on this river in numbers that are truly astounding. 500,000 sandhill cranes gather here each spring. And here in central Nebraska, they have the perfect combination of flowing water, a shallow river, fields of food for them to eat. And in this gathering, we have one of the greatest spectacles in North America. And people come here from all over the country and all around the world to see this event because it's unmatched anywhere else. Dams have impacts not just upstream in the area that gets flooded by a reservoir, but downstream throughout the entire system, where the blockage of flow alters the way the river flows downstream and can alter the habitat significantly.
The Platte River used to be over a mile wide. Today, diversions for irrigation have reduced its flow by 70%, squeezing migratory birds into smaller and smaller areas of habitat.
Towns and communities along the Platte have finally come to the realization that the kinds of flows they need to sustain drinking water supplies and to just generally provide for a healthy human environment are very similar to the kinds of flows that we've been saying are needed to sustain an ecosystem. So in a very real sense, what happens to the cranes is an indication of what's happening to us and the human community here on the Platte.
Still, the question remained, how to provide for Denver's growth. As the debate over Two Forks raged on, Denver spent $45 million on land and environmental impact studies and nearly received a permit to build the dam. But at the 11th hour, the project was vetoed by the Environmental Protection Agency.
All in all, we were able to demonstrate that you could supply 20% more water than Two Forks for half the cost of Two Forks and for 1/10 or 1/20th the environmental damage. Whenever cities have expensive capital projects to look at, you can almost always demonstrate conservation makes more sense than building a new project.
We want water for our cities, and hydropower is important, but so are wild rivers. And we feel that as a people, and we feel what a river really can be, a place of magic and mystery and beauty. And we've made up our mind now that we are going to keep some rivers wild, both for what they can give to us as a people and also to the animals and the plants that depend upon them, and also, I think, out of some ultimate respect for the river itself.
Denver now had to look within to figure out how to meet its water needs without a new source of water. And what Denver found is that a gallon of water saved through conservation and efficiency is just as good as a gallon supplied from a new dam like Two Forks. In fact, it's better because it doesn't involve destroying a beautiful place like Cheeseman Canyon.
Denver has since been encouraging conservation citywide. It turned out that just installing water meters made homeowners more conscious of how much they use. The Water Board raised water rates and now gives cash payments to businesses that adopt efficiency measures.
We are beginning a pilot program that will pay a business 3 times what they would pay us for the water if they save that water permanently. Now, it's a one-time payment of up to $20,000, but if that business installs water-saving hardware that will save us a good deal of water in the long run, we will pay them for it.
City Ice was one of the first local companies to undergo a water audit.
The biggest item was to try to do something with processed water that was coming off our ice-making operation. We were able to end up with about a 1.5 million gallon reduction in our water usage on an annual basis.
Water from the ice-making process was reclaimed for use as a cooling agent in refrigeration. Many businesses could cut their water use in half by reclaiming water for rinse cycles and cooling systems. One of the best ways homeowners can conserve is to try a landscaping idea pioneered in Denver. It's called xeriscape, and it involves selecting plants, trees, and ground cover native to the region or that require only small amounts of water, like buffalo grass. Overwatering a lawn is the single biggest household waste of water.
We've got to move toward pricing water at somewhere near its value. We currently give it away. In fact, sometimes we pay people to take it. Well, it's ludicrous that the most fundamental resource that we have, the one that is fundamental to life, is a resource in which we're giving it away. We waste water in ways that you can't imagine.
Does this completely modernize dishwashing?
Every housewife in the land will answer, yes.
The American dream of the 1950s was to have all the modern conveniences.
And just think of the thousands of hours that your hands don't have to soak in dishwater.
Washers, disposals, and dishwashers, all running on unlimited supplies of water.
In fact, the more dishes you have, the more time you save.
Today, the average American family of 4 uses 300 gallons of water a day. Enough to fill this bathtub 20 times. In Tucson, Arizona, at the Casa del Agua, or House of Water, a conventional home has been retrofitted with water-saving devices to see just how much an average family could save. Glenn and Catherine France have lived here for 10 years, raising their family and monitoring every drop of water.
Here at the Casa del Agua house, we use about half of what a typical home uses. That water is the potable water that I'm talking about. We also use water that is harvested from the roof, which is rainwater, and we use gray water, which is the water from the kitchen sinks, the bathtub, the shower, and the washing machine.
Fixtures have been equipped with low-flow shower heads and faucets. Recycled gray water and rainwater collected from the roof irrigate the family's xeriscape garden. Studies show that the best way to save water indoors is to replace the old 6-gallon per flush toilet with a new 1.6-gallon model, saving 21 gallons per person per day.
Low water use toilets have been used here since the house began 10 years ago. And as a result of the research that we did here on those toilets, local plumbing codes have been adopted, and now the national standard has been adopted for the use of the 1.6 gallon per flush toilets.
Casa del Agua is just one example of innovative programs around the world that are proving conservation can make a big difference. But households use only 10% of water worldwide, and industries claim only 25%. Agriculture uses the greatest share, 65% worldwide, and even more here in the Southwest.
A desert wasteland from which the bustling metropolis of Los Angeles was built. How, you ask? From water, imported water. So engineers have designed an ingenious way to import water from the mighty Colorado River to quench the thirst of this area's growing population. So now Southern California can rest assured that it will remain the golden land of opportunity and oranges.
Today, California uses more than its legal share of the Colorado. Someday it may have to give up that water. So more and more, California is looking toward conservation.
Historically, we've viewed water conservation as something that we do in the middle of a drought. And once the drought is over, we forget about it. It can't be that way anymore. Water conservation can make a tremendous difference. The water system, if you will, is probably the most inefficient system we have for any resource.
In California's Imperial Valley, irrigation water from the Colorado River is brought in by canals managed by the Bureau of Reclamation and paid for by U.S. taxpayers. Farming here is a billion-dollar business, and farmers get their water practically free. All they pay is the cost of delivery. Dating back to the 19th century, water rights in this valley are tied to the land. Since water is so cheap, there has been little incentive to invest in conservation.
The Imperial Irrigation District slurps up about a quarter of the Colorado River, maybe 20% of it, to irrigate 400,000 acres of land. Very permeable land and a scorching climate, so very high water demand. Now, a lot of people have complained about that for a long time as perhaps the ultimate example of inefficiency. The IID now is beginning to think about selling some of its water to Los Angeles. And I personally think that's a good idea. Los Angeles is really paying for the efficiency improvements and then paying for the water as well.
Like this pump-back system that recaptures surface runoff, paid for by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. MWD gets to keep the water saved, and the farmer gets to keep the system. In new water marketing deals, farmers are beginning to sell their water to cities like San Diego. It's a good way for thirsty cities to find new supplies. But it can create windfall profits for landowners selling water that's been subsidized at taxpayer expense. The billionaire Bass Brothers of Texas recently bought 30,000 acres here and hope to market some of the water that goes with their land.
We've got to stop giving away water as if it was a free good. You have farmers wasting water, and you have millions of people who need additional water supplies. Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it's going to be in a very short period of time. Someday we're going to have a vote about this.
Agriculture accounts for the lion's share of the world's water and a very large share, on the order of 80 to 85%, in most of the western U.S. So this is really the biggest pool of water that we have. Saving even a tiny share of water in agriculture can free up a lot of water to meet new urban needs.
Cities like Los Angeles are looking for ways to reduce the water they use and to reclaim and reuse water before they dispose of it. The Metropolitan Water District works with local groups like Mothers of East Los Angeles to encourage residents to install low-flow toilets. Started by Juana Gutierrez, the organization is now run by her daughter, Elsa Lopez.
We have given approximately about 85,000 toilets, and that would be a savings of 7.6 billion gallons of water a year.
People bring in their old water-guzzling toilets and exchange them for the new low-flow models. Residents benefit by saving on their water bills. And the Mothers of East LA get $25 for each old-fashioned toilet they collect for the city. The crushed toilets become roadbeds for freeways. The new toilets save the city 8 million gallons a day.
We're really excited about having the water conservation program and the results that have come from it, saving all those gallons of water and saving the community money and bringing in jobs for them.
Let's stop us right over here.
Each year, Lopez takes teenagers from East LA 300 miles north to Mono Lake so they can see where some of their water comes from. It's an unusual mountain lake rimmed with strange natural structures made of lime. They're called tufa towers.
How old is a tufa? This tufa in this grove is probably, some of it's as old as 1,000 years. But a lot of it's really young, 75 to 200 years. And yet it's above ground, and tufa only forms underwater. So we know that the lake has dropped pretty quickly.
Mono Lake was recently the center of heated environmental controversy. The lake's level had drained down because water from its feeder streams was being diverted to Los Angeles. But a state water board decision in 1994 stopped the diversions, and now its waters are slowly rising.
Pour off a little of the excess waters.
Mono Lake is a place that captures people's hearts and minds. I
think what we all realize is that there are monolakes at the ends of all of our taps, or these special places that are the source of our water supplies.
In the future, conservation and recycling will become even more important to Los Angeles. The loss of water from Mono Lake has increased the need to conserve. The city also knows that it will eventually have to give up some of the Colorado River water on which it depends, water that belongs to states upstream. And by treaty, a portion of the Colorado's water belongs to Mexico.
There's a very fundamental problem with the Colorado River. There was a very rainy year, and then all the politicians sat down to divide up the amount of water, and they made a very large mistake. They divided up more water than they've ever had since. It hasn't rained as much and haven't had as much water since the time that they divided it up. So what you have is you've over-allocated that river. You've given away more water than you really had.
The 7 states and 2 nations that share the Colorado have been described as thirsty dogs fighting over a damp sponge. This is one of the few wetlands remaining in the Colorado Delta, just south of the border. It gives a small idea of what the Delta used to be like before dams upstream diverted the river's waters.
In 1922, the great American conservationist Aldo Leopold paid a visit to the Colorado Delta and wrote about it in a marvelous essay in the Sand County Almanac, his masterwork. What he found there was a paradise for wildlife. There were jaguars, cougars, bobcats, teemed with waterfowl. It's so ironic that in that year, the Colorado River Compact was signed, and that began shutting off the flow of water to the Delta. So the Delta is now starved, and it's essentially a dead zone. Everything that Leopold saw there is gone.
Leopold described the Colorado Delta as a milk and honey wilderness full of 100 green lagoons. The region provided habitat for species that live mostly in zoos today. Endangered creatures like the jaguarundi, lynx, and Mexican wolf. Today, the Colorado Delta has been transformed into miles of dried-out salt flats. Except in the wettest years, the river no longer makes it to the Gulf of California, its historic destination.
Virtually nothing is reaching the Delta in an average year. And so the ecosystem has been completely changed. And the native communities that have relied on this ecosystem and this water for thousands of years are now suffering and very much in decline themselves.
Fisheries in this region are in severe trouble, in part because of overfishing, but also because diversions of water upstream have damaged the Delta's spawning grounds. The Cocopah Indians who live in the Delta once had a thriving culture of fishing and riverbank farming. Their way of life is now in jeopardy. Weeds choke the river behind their village. It's barely a foot deep.
Pues, ¿qué le diré? Pues que ya no hay río, pues está muy seco. Pues no hay agua, no hay pescado, no hay nada. Pues yo pesqué muy a gusto en la salada, como 14 años.
No, pues el agua del río, pues es de mucha importancia porque pues es donde vivimos nosotros, toda la comunidad aquí, en la pesca y en, pues todo, ¿no? Porque pues sin el agua, pues ya ve ahorita cómo estamos aquí fracasados por la cuestión, pues por falta del agua.
Today, for their household needs, the Cocopah rely upon water brought in by the barrel. They say bathing is basically a teacup affair. As for fishing, the Cocopah must now haul their boats 40 miles to get to the saltwater channel of the Gulf of California. By the time they've bought fuel for both the trucks and the boats, it becomes a costly trip. Fishing is a community activity for the Cocopah, but it's mainly the young men who go out in the boats. These waters were once rich fishing grounds, and fishermen's gill nets were filled with corvina and totuaba. But on this day, they catch nothing. Finally, after many hours of effort, they give up and head for home. It is a very long trip indeed. The community's young people still hold fast to the tribe's identity as river people. They've chosen the name pescadores, or fishermen, for their soccer team. But as their parents know, their future is clouded by the problems with the Colorado River.
No hay agua, no hay nada. Y si no vamos para abajo, pues ya viste, no agarramos nada. Esperanza de que suba, a ver cuándo sube el río Colorado otra vez para poder trabajar a gusto por ahí.
Perhaps, if the true potential of conservation could be realized and the benefits distributed fairly, there would someday be enough water for everyone.
To restore the Colorado River Delta will take a lot, and it's probably impossible to go back to what it used to be last century. But it's also a lot of things that can be done with just allowing some water to come in at particular times of the year. And I think a good important lesson is when we look at other deltas, we should now carefully look at the environmental impacts that damming and irrigation projects will have. We should not repeat what we did with the Colorado River, because those things do not reverse.
In the end, we may need a new water ethic, an ethic that says it's important now to begin sharing water with each other as well as with nature. There's an old proverb that goes something like, the frog does not drink up the pond in which it lives. And I think it's a very simple wisdom, but it really captures the challenge, I think, that we're facing, which is how we're going to meet our growing human needs for water and still live in balance with the ecosystems that support all life.